seriously talking about the biggest stories that matter to you the most. Breaking news, John Calipari is finalizing a 5-year deal to become the Arkansas Razorbacks' next head coach, covering college sports like no one else. The biggest guests in sports. We now welcome in Hall of Famer Jim Calhoun.
Such a pride I had, I came to Connecticut.
The legend, Tim Tebow, joins us.
We'll run it back. I like it.
The legend, Herschel Walker. Welcome in, everybody. Little Wednesday morning edition, Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's having a great day. Probably should have checked the lighting before we came live here, but I am live. It is Wednesday, and it's that time of year. It's December, but we got ourselves, people, a loaded show. Okay, we're going to talk about college football playoff rankings. Listen, it's sort of a disaster. It sort of isn't. Bama is getting in. People are freaking out. What about Notre Dame, Miami? We're going to talk about all of that. By the way, I've said it for weeks. BYU is actually getting screwed harder than anybody. Do want to talk about a little bit this all of a sudden now Texas is there's more injustice to Texas because they're 9-3 than any team ever. Sark is going on a media tour. It is clear ESPN is in on it. We'll discuss that. Did you see late last night, Ole Miss players started calling out Lane Kiffin. They are not happy with how he left, and they are not happy with the narrative that he painted. And then we'll talk a little college hoops. UConn goes to Kansas, gets the big win. Speaking of big wins, Carolina goes into Rupp, but my goodness, the Kentucky Wildcats are struggling right now. We'll talk about those games, Florida and Duke, and plenty more from the world of college sports. Before we get started, a couple quick reminders. Make sure you're subscribed to Aaron Torres Pod YouTube channel. YouTube closing in on 67,000 subscribers. I think we can get to 70 before the end of the year, but I cannot do it without your help. Appreciate everybody's support. I already see Luke in the chat, one of our great listeners. Thank you to everybody who does support this show. You can also, by the way, find us on Apple and Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Also, before we get started, do want to thank our friends. Do want to thank the official ticketing partner of the Aaron Torres Pod. I want to go ahead and thank SeatGeek. Okay, so SeatGeek is America's #1 ticketing app. Over 28 million downloads. And what I love about SeatGeek is two things. I actually had a buddy mention this to me the other day. SeatGeek, every ticket on the app is rated 1 through 10, right? So if you're going to buy a dud, if you're going to buy a lemon, they will tell you every ticket 1 through 10, a green dot or a red dot. Green dot means go ahead and purchase that bad boy. Red dot means maybe you want to go ahead and stay away. What I also love about SeatGeek, let's be honest, it's that they take care of listeners of the Aaron Torres Pod. So if you go to SeatGeek.com or if you use the SeatGeek app, if you use promo code Torres, it gets you $20 off your first purchase. SeatGeek.com, SeatGeek app, promo code Torres gets you $20 off your first purchase. That does it. By the way, it doesn't just have to be sports. Could be concerts, shows, comedy, anything on SeatGeek. By the way, you want to go to a college football, college basketball game? That's cool too. SeatGeek.com, promo code Torres. SeatGeek.com, SeatGeek app, promo code Torres gets you $20 off your first purchase. With that said, buddy, it is a busy Wednesday in the world of sports. No more time to waste. So people, let's do it. Let's get to the topic of the day. Topic of the day, I'll say this, every Wednesday this time of year, you can probably guess what the topic of the day is going to be coming in. It is, folks, we have a new batch of college football playoff rankings. Now, I want to be clear on this. I don't believe that the committee actively tries to change things around just to create narratives and conversation. But what I do believe is I actually think the week-to-week conversation and the week-to-week show has actually hurt the discourse of the college football playoff more than anything. Every single week we get a new set of rankings. Sometimes nothing of note happens. Sometimes we get a situation where, whatever. And then somebody has to go and explain themselves on TV, and then everybody quote tweets it, and everybody shares it, and everybody freaks out, and it's a dissertation on why the committee's bad, why 12 teams is bad, why auto bids are bad. Like, is anybody actually happy with these rankings ever? I mean, I guess if you're an Ohio State fan or if you're an Ole Miss fan who somehow moved up a spot after losing your head coach, you're happy. but it just feels like it has hurt the discourse of this sport. But let's go ahead and get into what happened on Tuesday night, because I think it actually gave a great reflection as to what the committee is going to do on Saturday, or on Sunday, I should say. By the way, Matt, I haven't even told you this. I think we'll just go live after the selection show on Sunday. You know, every college football pod in America is going to be doing it, but there's no reason to wait until 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night to do it. So we'll probably be live as soon as these rankings come out. But the bottom line is, once the bracket is out, it feels to me like essentially 11 of 12 spots are set. But for the sake of this conversation, let's say 10 of 12 spots are set. Okay, so the 10 that I believe are set, and Matt, you can pop up the rankings. Maybe that's probably the best way for us to do this right now. Ohio State is number 1. Indiana is number 2. Georgia number 3. Texas Tech 4. Oregon 5. Ole Miss, as I said, moves up a spot to 6. A&M 7. Oklahoma 8. And then I believe really where this gets interesting is the 9 through 12 spots. Alabama at 9. Notre Dame at 10, BYU at 11, Miami at 12. Matt, you can leave this up for half a second because I think visually this is going to help the consumer. So I believe that actually 11 of the 12 spots are set, but for the sake of this conversation, let's say it's 10. I think the spots that are set, the 2 teams playing for the Big Ten championship, Ohio State or Indiana, I think either team could win 75-0, which would be a wild score, by the way. Both teams are in. I think Georgia in the SEC is in, win or lose. Obviously, with Texas Tech, we'll slot them in as the Big 12 champ. By the way, we're going to have, remember, we're going to have 5 conference champions get auto bids, right? So now the conversation becomes, does the ACC get a bid, or is it the American champ, either Tulane, North Texas, or is it also they're going to get in? But then the question becomes, is James Madison actually going to get the 5th at-large bid? If James Madison wins the Sun Belt and if Duke wins the ACC, we are going to see both the American champ and James Madison as the Sun Belt champ into this field, okay? So basically the 5 conference champs, whoever wins the Big 10, whoever wins the SEC, whoever wins the Big 12, whoever wins the American, and then either the ACC champ Virginia or the Sun Belt champ. As far as the at-larges, I do feel like of the 7 spots, I think 6, but again, for the sake of conversation, we'll say 5 are locked in. The loser of the Big Ten championship game, either Ohio State or Indiana, and then Oregon, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Oklahoma round out the 5 of the 7 that I believe are locked in. Now, let's get to numbers 9 through 12 on that board, okay? So the 4 teams that it seems like everybody wants to have a discourse on, 9 through 12, Alabama, Notre Dame, BYU, and Miami, okay? And so I think everybody knows, but as quick context, Alabama, of course, with the Iron Bowl win, is playing for an SEC title. Notre Dame is off. BYU is playing for a Big 12 title. And Miami is off as well. Even though they are the highest-ranked ACC team, they are not in the ACC championship game. So let's get into it. And let me start by saying this. I keep saying, I've already said 2 or 3 times, I think 11 of 12 spots are locked in, but for the sake of argument, let's say 10 of 12. Why am I saying that? It is because Alabama fans have worked themselves up into a tizzy over the last couple of days, convincing themselves that somehow, if they were to lose the SEC championship game, they could be left out, okay? Let me say this. There's an exception to every rule, and you never want to say anything with 100% certainty. If they lose, again, 42-0, and Ty Simpson gets hurt, and it's clear that he's not going to play in the playoff, yes, I think there's a world where somehow, some way they could be left out, okay? But at the same time, I don't think Alabama's going to get blown out. Kalen DeBoer is 2-0 against Kirby Smart. They won in Athens earlier this year. I think that's actually kind of important because, you know, if they get blown out against Georgia, and you could say, well, we beat them a few months ago. We're not that, we had a bad day, right? And so this notion that Alabama is going to get left out, like, I don't know if people just need something to talk about, or Alabama fans, but somehow Alabama has convinced themselves it's them against the world when literally virtually every break goes their way. Now, last year, the committee chose SMU over Bama, but that was because the committee going into the final week said, if you're playing in the final weekend and you've already clinched a spot, we're not going to drop teams down. So Alabama was never getting in last year. But the notion that they're somehow going to fall with a third loss in the extra game in the SEC championship game, it's not happening, okay? And to take it a step further, the committee actually protected themselves from this. So there were a couple arguments and debates on Tuesday night. One of them was, why did Alabama move up a spot, Notre Dame moves back a spot, after Alabama survives the Iron Bowl and Notre Dame beats Stanford like, I forget what the final score was. It was like 56-3 or something like that, okay? And so I bring it up because everyone was freaking out. Why does Alabama move up a spot? And Hunter Yurachek, who I don't think is good, he's the Arkansas AD who's in charge of the committee. He had to go up and make some explanation. He said, the Iron Bowl. There's a very simple reason that Alabama moved up ahead of Notre Dame. It is so obvious, and it boggles my mind that we're still having these dumb conversations without any context at all. Everyone's freaking out. Well, how did Alabama move up a spot? The Iron Bowl win wasn't that good. The committee is literally protecting themselves. Like for the Alabama fan that's worried about being left out of the college football playoff, the committee just told you there is 0% chance you're going to be left out of the college football playoff. You know how I know? It is because they literally moved Alabama up a spot ahead of Notre Dame, right? Because if they did not move, and again, I think everyone, again, looks at these moves in the context of the exact moment. Why did this happen on this day, at this moment, after this game, before that game? The reason Alabama was moved up a spot is not because the win over Auburn in the Iron Bowl was so great that we need to move them up the rankings. No. Why it was done was to protect the committee in case Alabama loses in the SEC championship game, right? Let's just do some simple mental math, people. I don't know why this stuff makes me so mad, but it drives me crazy. Let's do some simple mental math, okay? If Alabama is ranked number 10 and Notre Dame is ranked ahead of them at number 9, and then Alabama loses a game, you can't move Alabama ahead of Notre Dame next week if they lose in the SEC championship game, right? You can't do it. So they're moving up Alabama now to protect themselves in case they lose. And then they could say, well, they were already in the field at number 9. So now they're still in the field. They're just an at-large rather than the SEC champion. This is such a no-brainer. It makes too much sense. And so when I said to start the show that I believe 11 of 12 spots are set, I believe 11 of 12 spots are set. Both teams in the SEC are getting SEC championship game are getting in. I know Alabama is at number 9. I know there are 3 teams in the SEC ahead of them that are not going to be in Atlanta, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, and Oklahoma. All 3 of those teams are getting in. Doesn't matter if Alabama loses, they're getting in. Georgia is getting in. Oregon and the 2 teams in the Big Ten are getting in as well. What I want to talk about now is the final at-large spot. And again, keep in mind, part of this is because we have 5 conference champions. The ACC's best team is not playing for their conference championship, which throws a total wrinkle into things. And let's talk about the final spot, because I believe the final spot is going to come down to one of 3 teams. And it's those teams right in that 10, 11, 12 range. Okay, so I already explained to you why Notre Dame dropped a spot to number 10. BYU is at number 11. Miami is at number 12. And the big conversation now is Miami beat Notre Dame head-to-head. How can they be 2 spots behind Notre Dame? Same record, head-to-head win. Make it make sense. That was social media. That was social media all night on Tuesday, okay? Before we even get to Miami, Notre Dame, I should mention, and BYU fans, I've said this for 3 weeks, nobody's getting screwed harder than BYU. Okay, let's get that out there, because every metric, BYU actually has a better resume than Notre Dame and Miami, let alone Vanderbilt and Texas, who we'll get into in a second. But BYU is actually getting screwed harder than anybody. BYU, 11-1 overall. Notre Dame and Miami, 10-2 overall. Okay, BYU, their only loss on the road to a top 5 team. Miami, 2 losses to unranked teams, SMU and Louisville. And then, oh, by the way, Notre Dame, they have 2 good losses, but no wins better than what BYU has. BYU has 2 wins over teams currently in the top 20. That is more than Notre Dame has. That is more than Miami has. Oh, by the way, we talked about this a few weeks ago. The strength of record metric that everybody told us was so important a year ago, BYU is ranked ahead of everyone that is on the bubble. They're ranked ahead of Notre Dame. They're ranked ahead of Miami. They're ranked ahead of Texas. They're ranked ahead of Vandy. BYU's getting screwed harder than anybody. As a matter of fact, I didn't even send this to Matt. ESPN yesterday was comparing resumes for the final at large spot. Didn't even include BYU. I mean, the jig is so obvious, it's almost embarrassing, okay? But BYU fans, I hate to say it, I'm fighting the fight. I think Dave Portnoy is fighting the fight. Other than that, where is Brett Yormark? Why is he not fighting this? Because you guys should be ahead of Notre Dame, and you guys should be in position, win or lose, on Saturday to Texas Tech to be in. I don't think that's the case, though. And so let's get back to Notre Dame versus Miami, because this is going to be the big talking point going into Selection Sunday on Sunday, okay? The big talking point is Miami has the head-to-head win. Notre Dame is 2 spots ahead of them. What does it mean, and what is going to happen on Selection Sunday? I'm here to tell you, like I said, the committee, sometimes they do stuff in the heat of the moment, but sometimes they do stuff looking a week, 2, 3, 4 down the road. Sometimes they look at the potential looming issue that will emerge and they nip it in the bud before it's ever an issue. And so to me, teams 9 through 12 are very strategic. Alabama was placed ahead of Notre Dame, so if Alabama loses the SEC championship game, you don't have to jump them over teams. You can just say they were already in, okay? Notre Dame, BYU, and Miami. If BYU loses on Saturday, and they're currently a 12.5-point favorite according to Circa Sportsbook, guess what happens? Not great at math, never been on a playoff committee, but BYU is going to drop. Makes sense? Whatever. And guess what's going to happen? Miami and Notre Dame are going to be ranked right next to each other, and then the committee can say, we are literally comparing them head-to-head for the final spot, and then boom, easy does it. Miami goes ahead of Notre Dame based on the head-to-head win, and they get into the college football playoff. Listen, I could go on and on. This is 1,000% what's going to happen. Now, the wild card is if Texas Tech were to lose to BYU, BYU would get the Big 12's bid. Would Texas Tech then take the final spot? I think it would happen. But the notion, listen, the committee, we can argue about them doing a show every single week. But the thing I will say about the committee is usually they actually don't get it wrong, okay? Last year, again, SMU versus Bama for the final spot. Well, guess what? They had already said the week before they weren't going to drop teams out that were playing in a conference championship game if they were already in. So they boxed themselves into a corner. They got it right and took SMU. I'm not saying who was better or who was worse. I'm saying they got it right, though, based on their own criteria. The year before, Florida State versus Bama for the 4th and final spot in the 4-team playoff era. We all remember what happened. Florida State loses Jordan Travis, but based on their bylaws, when Jordan Travis got hurt, when the team struggled without him, they were allowed to move Bama ahead of him. I think they got it right. And I think they're going to get it right here. If BYU loses, Notre Dame and Miami are going to be head-to-head in the rankings, and then again, you can compare them directly. I said it before I even get to it, as a matter of fact. I just want to pull something up really quick because I didn't hear this. It was either live on the broadcast or maybe on the teleconference, but Nicole Auerbach basically quoted Hunter Yurachek. Compare them head to head. Guess what? If we have to compare them, Matt, do we have a mic issue? We good? Everything good? Okay, cool. This mic is driving me crazy. Okay, so let me see here. Real quick. Give me 1 second. Okay. Hold on. I got to find Nicole Auerbach's tweet. Okay. This is what Hunter Yurachek said on Tuesday night. CFP chair Hunter Yurachek, quote, we're not comparing Notre Dame and Miami side by side. says the grouping has mostly been Alabama, Notre Dame, BYU, and Miami. So the one head-to-head result is one of multiple factors at play. And then she basically goes on to a few tweets later, basically insinuate that if there were, whatever happens in the Big 12 championship game, anyway, I found the wrong tweet. The bottom line is Hunter Yurchek basically admitted if it gets to a point where they are in the rankings next to each other, they are going to be compared, simultaneously. And once they are, guess what's going to happen? Miami is going to jump Notre Dame. And so that's my big prediction. And Matt, you could pop up my tweet that went crazy viral. I didn't even think it was that controversial of a debate. But as I said, and this is the whole crux of the segment, prediction on the final spot, putting Notre Dame, BYU, and Miami in order 10 through 12 was strategic. If BYU loses, all of a sudden, Notre Dame and Miami are ranked next to each other and Miami moves up. If BYU wins, Texas Tech is in, and neither Notre Dame or Miami gets in. Mark it down. It's going to happen. Listen, people, you don't need, you don't need Matt Patricia's astrophysicist degree or whatever. I don't even know. What is it? I don't know. He's smarter than me. You don't need his degree from Harvard or Penn or wherever to see what is going on here. It is so obvious. And again, for the last time, because I want to move to some other stuff, including Texas, which is just a total wild card here. You don't need to be Matt Patricia with your rocket science degree to see what's going on. The committee is setting it up. They want to make sure that there are no issues come Sunday. And again, I think the only wild card here is what happens if BYU wins the Big 12 championship game. I don't think BYU gets in if they don't win the Big 12. I think that's unfair, but I don't think they get in. I don't think Alabama is out if they lose the SEC championship game unless there's a crazy rash of injuries or they lose 72-0. I do think that the committee is the field is largely set. And again, it will ultimately come down to Notre Dame versus Miami for the final spot. Maybe Notre Dame versus Miami versus Texas Tech if Texas Tech were to lose. But the one thing I can tell you two things right now, definitively mark it down. Matt, clip this off. I will tell you two things definitively right now. Alabama is not getting left out if they lose the SEC championship game, and Miami is not being left out of the field if Notre Dame is in. So again, Big 12 championship game might change things, but Miami is not being left out of the field if Notre Dame is in. Now, by the way, last thing, because I want to get to some other stuff. There are big picture conversations about how we put the field together. I like the auto bids. I have no problem with the auto bids. What I do think probably should change, let's not have all these crazy tiebreakers for these conference championship games. Just have the two highest ranked teams in all the Power Fours in the conference championship game. Then if you have unranked teams, you can get into all the tiebreakers. 90% of the problems that we have here is that Miami is not playing for an ACC title. Another conversation for another day. By the way, I hate to say this. I feel like we're headed for a world where we're getting playoff expansion and more people are fighting that we should not have these G5 bids. I hate that. The G5s have been fighting for 100 years to get a seat at the table. And I hope that they are included in whatever field it is going forward. But like I opened the show by saying it, and I mean it. The discourse on this stuff has become so dumb, it literally hurts my head. Speaking of dumb stuff that literally hurts my head, let's switch gears to the 13th team in the college football playoff rankings, unlucky number 13, and that is the University of Texas. Okay, so Texas is certainly in what I would call, they're the most unique team in these rankings. Okay, and I think there have been certain things that have been justifiable about the conversation about Texas prior to this year, right? Last year, Texas goes to the SEC, finishes 11-1 in the regular season. They basically beat nobody of note, okay? This year's the opposite. They had like a bizarrely tough schedule. It's not only that they played Ohio State in the out of conference. It's not only that they played Georgia on the road and they played, Oklahoma's improved, whatever. They had a wild schedule. They played, Texas fans, correct me if I'm wrong, they played 0 SEC home games until November of this year. It's crazy. 3 of their final 4 were at home. And they played, what would that be? Their first 4 games away from home. So if I remember correctly, they played at Florida, Then they played Oklahoma on a neutral, which technically counted as a home game. Then they played at Kentucky, at Mississippi State. So that's right. So they had a tough schedule. No one is denying it. What is also true is this. They went 9-3. They have a very bad loss on their resume to Florida. And in my opinion, they really have no argument for a 12-team playoff. Okay, this is part, whether we have 4 teams, whether we have 12 teams, whether we have 30 teams. At some point, you just don't have an argument. There just is no leg to stand on. And I will say this, though, is that you knew coming out of that Texas A&M game on Friday night that people were going to start banging the drum. As a matter of fact, I put out the preventative tweet on Friday night just because I knew this was coming. Okay, so Friday night, Black Friday, I'm sitting at dinner with my family. And I hate being the dude that's on the phone when you're with your family. But as soon as the Texas game goes final, I know what the discourse is going to be. Texas, they're 9-3. You got to put them into the playoff. They play in the mighty SEC. They're unbelievable. And so, Matt, you can pop up my tweet from Friday. This is what I tweeted at the time. This was on Friday night right after the game. I said, let's get one thing straight. If 9-3 Texas misses the playoff, it isn't because they played Ohio State. It's because they lost to dog crap Florida. They also barely survived Kentucky and Mississippi State. Congrats on the win over Texas A&M. They aren't one of the 7 best at-large candidates. So that was what I put out on Friday night. But you know what ended up happening? Well, first of all, let me say this. I'll defend Texas on one thing. I put that out on Friday. I certainly was open to the conversation of Texas being an at-large team if stuff happened on Saturday, right? If Notre Dame loses to Stanford, if BYU loses to UCF, if Alabama loses the Iron Bowl, I am fine with Texas moving up the rankings based on the quality of their wins. And to Texas's credit, they have a couple really good wins. They obviously have the win over A&M, as good as essentially any win in college football. They have the win over Vandy. They have the win over Oklahoma. So they have 3 really good wins. But once you get that third loss with everybody ahead of you winning, there really is, at least I thought, no leg to stand on. That is, at least until Monday and Tuesday, when all of a sudden the SEC hype machine converges with the Texas hype machine. And boy, oh boy, do we have a take for the ages. Okay, it's crazy. Every year there's an existential crisis in college football, and it only centers around an SEC team that just so happens to be a big brand. By the way, Vandy's on the outside of the college football playoff. It's not an existential crisis that they're out. Last year, it wasn't an existential crisis that Ole Miss was out, except to Lane Kiffin. But last year it was Bama. This year it's Texas. And here is the twist. Texas, of course, lost in week 1 to Ohio State, as I referenced in that tweet from Black Friday after the Texas A&M win. And I said it at the time, and I will say it again. They're not on the outside looking in of the college football playoff because they lost to Ohio State in week 1. It's because they went to the Swamp and lost to a terrible Florida team. And don't tell me, oh, it's the Swamp, it's so tough. Well, why did Tennessee win there? Kentucky beat the same Florida team by 30 and then fired their coach a couple weeks later. So don't tell me it's about the Ohio State loss, but here's the thing. They are trying to tell us it's about the Ohio State loss because the narrative full speed ahead. Okay, so the narrative now coming out of Texas, and it has been picked up by the ESPN talking heads, is Texas, if Texas just had it scheduled, Ohio State, they'd be in the college football playoff. But here's the part. That it's not just we're screwing Texas. It's that there is an existential crisis in college football that can only be addressed by putting Texas in the college football playoff. That existential crisis, I can't say that word, but I keep trying, is if Texas isn't put in the playoff and if they are punished for playing Ohio State in week 1, then all of the great out-of-conference games that we love are all going to disappear. And so this narrative started with Steve Sarkisian on Friday night. He said something to the effect of, it'd be a disaster if we were out. Well, he started doing the media rounds Monday, Tuesday. Matt, you could pop up the Sirius XM tweet, okay? So Steve Sarkisian was on Sirius XM. He said, this is a quote, why did we even play Ohio State? If we are 10-2 right now that played 4 top 10 opponents, we are ranked 6th in the country and not even having this discussion. So why the hell am I going to play that game next year? Well, Sark is dead wrong. But before I get to how dumb and how wrong Sark is, and you can quote me on that. That's a great quote graphic. You don't actually have to make that, Matt, but it is a great quote graphic, why Sark is so dumb and wrong. Let's get to the narrative taking on more layers as the day goes on. Again, because something catches fire on social media, people don't really think that hard about it. They don't use critical thinking. Now, let's be honest, ESPN also just so happens to have a financial vested interest in the SEC being good and obviously Texas being good. And so Kirk Herbstreit, who, by the way, listen, I like Herbie. I know the last couple of years he's become a little bit controversial, whatever. I like Herbie. I also heard, by the way, he's dealing with some health issues in his family, so I wish him and his family some speedy recoveries. This is not personal to Herbie, okay? But so Herbie, in light of the Texas announcement that Steve Sarkisian, well, we're not playing Ohio State if we're going to cancel that game if they don't let us in the playoff. Well, it was funny because Alabama did cancel some out-of-conference games or at least postpone them. Matt, you could go ahead and put up the tweet. So Alabama announced that it was moving some games. I'm going to explain the games in a minute. And Kirk Herbstreit on his Twitter page, which he runs, he says, quote, get ready to see this happen all over the sport. If it's only about how many wins you have and not about who you're playing and where you're playing, you're going to see every AD make these same moves. Kiss meaningful non-conference games in late August and early September goodbye. Cupcakes moving forward till we get to conference play. That was Kirk Herbstreit fired up because Alabama has moved some games in their out-of-conference slate. It was a quote tweet of the Alabama official Twitter page announcing scheduling changes in the future. The issue is Kirk Herbstreit very clearly did not actually click the link. Because if you actually click the link, you saw that Alabama moved back a game against South Florida, USF. You may have heard of them, USF, the Bulls, from 2026 to 2032. Is that the existential crisis? Is that the meaningful was that on the top, 3 out-of-conference games that you had circled on your schedule next year? It's so insane, and it didn't even stop there. All right, so Dan Orlovsky, okay? Dan Orlovsky is a UConn guy. I know I'm supposed to stick together with my UConn guys, and I'm supposed to love all of them, and all of us Huskies got to stick together, right? He's kind of been showing, I'm going to use an inappropriate word. If you're with kids, earmuffs for literally 30 seconds, but 3, 2, 1, I'm going to say it in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so 3, 2, 1. Dan Orlovsky's been showing his ass a little bit the last couple of days. Okay, so Dan Orlovsky, listen, NFL legend, not legend, but, great NFL player. Not going to criticize him. 10 years in the league, accomplished things in professional sports that I never could. Truth, indisputable. 10 years in the league, 12 years in the league. He had a great career. Whatever. Great on tape, great on film, good at breaking stuff down that happens in games. I think he's shown his ass a little bit in these big picture conversations. First of all, he was one of the ones that was really pushing the Lane Kiffin. It's a calendar issue. No, it's not a calendar issue. There's no calendar that's going to fix Lane Kiffin wanting to take the LSU job. There's no calendar because coaches aren't supposed to leave jobs when you have a team good enough to win a national championship. So I kind of chirped at him for that. Then on Tuesday, in light of all of this Texas stuff, Dan Orlovsky took to social media, did the whole I'm going to flip my phone and we're going to have a super serious conversation about out-of-conference games in light of this Texas stuff. Matt, you can go ahead and play that sound.
All right, Texas in or out tonight. Food for thought. Okay, so if Texas is left out of the top 12, I think what you'll see is teams specifically from the SEC no longer scheduling challenging out-of-conference games early in the season, a la like we saw Texas going to Ohio State this year. Texas has accomplished a lot this year, whether you think they're one of the 12 best teams or deserved or earned or all those phrases. I think they're the only team that at the time when they played the opponent has 3 wins against top 10 teams. They're the only team I think right now that has presently ranked 2 wins against top 10 teams. They're the only team that has 3 wins against top 15 teams, and I think the first team since 2019 LSU that has 3 wins against the top 10. I believe I saw a tweet, not my information, someone else's. But there's 3 losses in there, okay? So if they are left out, I do think because of that week 1 on the road win against Ohio State, a non-conference power, teams from the SEC specifically, because they're obviously one of the, if not the best conferences in football, teams will sit there and go, we're not going to schedule challenging out-of-conference early season games because there's no need to. Because if we lose, we'll get penalized more than the benefit of winning. It's just about wins and losses. That's it. And I think that's going to be the downside of if the committee leaves Texas out, teams from the SEC are going to go, no, we're not going to go play on the road against Oregon, on the road against Ohio State, on the road against Indiana, on the road against a Miami, on the road against a Texas Tech. We're not going to do it because there's no benefit to us and it'll only get penalized.
All right, so upon second listen, maybe wasn't quite as bad as I thought. I do give Dan a little credit. He at least brought some facts. You know, what was it somebody take that for data? Dave Fizdale was take that for data, but you know, somebody was like bring facts to the conversation or something. I don't remember. He at least brought facts. But fundamentally, this is just the dumbest argument that has ever existed. Okay, there's a couple reasons. First of all, these schools are not canceling big games that are already on the schedule. You know why? Because they create a crap ton of revenue. Everything in college sports right now is about creating revenue. Okay, I saw a stat or heard a stat. Ole Miss hosting a college football playoff game could potentially be like 50, 60, 70 million dollars in revenue for the town of Oxford. Okay, hotels, bars, restaurants, ticket sales, beer sales, whatever. So you think that Texas is going to drop Ohio State next year if they miss the playoff, and they're going to replace them with Akron? It's not happening. Because think about how much those tickets are going to be and how much those hotels are going to cost and how much the beer. And this is all about creating revenue in a world where you need revenue to pay your football team. So 1, games are not getting canceled. 2, let's also remember this. The reason, and I said it from the beginning, the reason Texas is not in the bracket right now is not because they lost to Ohio State. It's because they lost to Florida, okay? And it's crazy to me because say what you want about the SEC, okay? All those top teams, Oklahoma, Ole Miss, Alabama, whoever, Georgia. The SEC this year was extremely top-heavy and extremely bottom-heavy. And by the way, Vandy I would include in this conversation as well. And to the credit of all of the teams that I mentioned, none of them lost to the dreck that was the bottom of the league. No one lost to Auburn, except for Arkansas. No one lost to Arkansas, period. No one lost to South Carolina of note. And so no one above them in the SEC took a bad loss. Texas is the only one. And don't tell me how tough the Swamp is to play. I know it's tough. Guess what? Everywhere on the road is tough. And guess what? Tennessee went up to the Swamp a few weeks after Texas and put up about 200 points, okay? Kentucky destroyed Florida at home. And, you know, again, this is just part of the deal. Here's the other thing that's crazy. There's 2 other things, then I'll switch gears, I promise, because I want to get to some Lane Kiffin stuff and some college basketball. 1, I love the notion that the only reason we're out of the playoff picture is because we scheduled this game. Well, actually, it's actually the only reason that you're in the playoff picture, if we're being perfectly honest, because here's the thing. Think about the other teams from the SEC that are in the playoff picture. Why is Oklahoma in the playoff picture at 10-2? Yes, it's because they beat Bama on the road. Yes, because they beat Tennessee on the road, which that win has increasingly gotten less impressive. It's because they played and beat Michigan. That is a very important part of Oklahoma's resume, and you could kind of pretty clearly pick apart Oklahoma's resume if they had played Akron instead of Michigan and did not have that win on their resume. By the way, we could criticize Sharon Moore. Don't know if he's the guy. But I have yet to hear Sharon Moore say, if we just hadn't played Oklahoma, we'd be in the playoff right now. He knows it's stupid. He knows they shouldn't have lost to USC. They shouldn't have gotten destroyed by Ohio State, and it wouldn't be an issue. Finally, let me also say this. Every time an out-of-conference game gets scheduled or tweaked or adjusted, it's not because this is the other part about Herbie's argument that drove me crazy. Well, this is good. A lot of games are going to be canceled. You know why a lot of games are going to be canceled? Because the SEC just added a 9th conference game. So let's do some mental math, okay? We have games on the schedule for years down the road. We have 16 SEC teams. They are all going to play each other one more time. There has not been a game added to the overall schedule, which means all of them have to find a game to drop going forward. For Alabama, it was USF. For Texas tomorrow, it may be UTSA. I don't know. But the reason these games are being dropped is because we added an SEC game. And lastly, I'll say this. Greg Sankey, for all my criticism, he has mandated that in addition to the SEC schedule, you also play another team from a power conference. So yes, there are ways to finagle it. You don't have to play Ohio State. You could play, Boston College, play Pitt, whatever. But you do have to play those games. So I could go on and on. But like this notion that Texas is somehow getting screwed, they're not getting screwed. Don't lose to Florida, which outside of Alabama losing to Florida State is by far the worst loss of any legitimate team in the playoff conversation. That's why Texas isn't getting in, not because they lost to Ohio State. And by the way, Sark, you're not canceling the Ohio State game. Stop. All right. We've gone 40 minutes and we're still talking about the stupid playoff rankings. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back. When we do, I want to talk a little Lane Kiffin. Did you see his players calling him out publicly on social media? We'll discuss that. Then we do have to get to some college hoops. Tuesday was a busy night. Quick break. Be right back. All right, we're going to get back to the show in a minute. But before we do, I have so many people that reach out and say, Torres, you give me hours and hours and hours of free content every day, every month, every year. What can I do to help support the show? Well, you want to support the show and look good in the process. Make sure to check out and support the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. Some of you wondering, what can I get in that merch store, Torres? Well, Kentucky fans, we got our Mark Pope Hope and Pope t-shirts. That is right. Mark Pope, monster first year. Year 2 is going to be even better. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirt at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is coming. It is here. John Calipari has things rocking. Get your Big Pig Invasion tees. Again, aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. St. John's fans, we have our Big Rick Energy t-shirts. And if you're just a college basketball fan in general, guess what? Your March is for Day Drinking shirt. That is the shirt that you need year-round, but especially for the next NCAA tournament. You can order yours now. By the way, football fans, we got you covered too. Nebraska fans, new era, new rules, the t-shirt that you need before the start of this coming season. And oh, by the way, if you're a Colorado fan, if you're just a Coach Prime fan, we have our Dion shirts and hats, more of them than we know what to do with. So to check out the full line of Aaron Torres Media merch and also support the show, good news is we're going to have even more for the fall. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And for more information, you can always reach out at Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com. All right, everybody. All right, back. Good to be back. Matt, really quick, how does my mic sound? Everything good? Everything good? Okay, cool. We got some mic issues in the Torres studios here, but we're going to fight through them like a champ. Really quickly, before we get to Lane Kiffin, I thought the Alabama fan in the chat, I want to give him credit, or she, we are the good people with an Alabama Script A logo, said Alabama's canceling some games because if they don't cancel some, they will be playing 11 Power 4 games in a season. And so this is exactly the point that I'm trying to make. Thank you for the comment. Is that it's not about canceling big games because Texas got left out of the playoff. It's that you added a power conference game to your schedule when the SEC added the next league game. And so thank you, we are the good people. It has nothing to do with the playoff. And by the way, I don't think Alabama should play 11 power conference teams. You're playing 9. The 10th is mandated. Bring in Abilene Christian. Bring in Eastern Illinois. I'm not somebody that gets upset because 2 or 3 weeks a year, you need a game to get ready for the meat of your schedule. So I have no problem with it, but it's a good point by We Are the People. Let's go ahead and switch gears to Lane Kiffin. Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and pivot. I was going to do Circa here. Yeah, we'll do Circa here real quick before we get to Lane Kiffin. You know what I got to do. I was going to save it for later, but I want to talk about them now. I want to talk about our friends. I want to talk about our hotel and casino partners. I want to talk about Circa Sportsbook and the Circa Casino. Okay, so Circa is our official hotel and casino partner. I was just out at the Vegas property for like 4 days last weekend. Beautiful property, great restaurants, great food, and it's the best place in Vegas to watch games. Biggest sports book in the world, stadium swim, all of that. But you know what's even better than being at Circa? If you can't make it to Vegas, Circa has opened up a new sports book at Mint Kentucky Downs in Franklin, Kentucky. All of the same great amenities that are in Vegas are now found at the Mint in Franklin. Beautiful new studio. They're doing some VSiN shows out of there. And I got nothing but great things to say. What I'm really excited about, I'm actually going to be at the Mint next week. So I'll be in Nashville for some work stuff. And I'm going to shoot down to the Mint. Probably next Thursday or so, we'll do some shows down there. And then later in the year, during college hoops season, the heart of college hoops, March Madness time or so, we'll do some sort of big Torres event. I want all of you to come. But if you live in the area, check it out. Circa Casino, Mint Kentucky Downs in Franklin, Kentucky. 45, 35, whatever it is, minutes from Nashville, right on the Tennessee border. I'm fired up to be there next week, and I'm fired up to do a show from there with you. All right, let's go ahead and switch gears. There was other stuff in the world of college football besides the playoff rankings. By the way, don't know what the heck Penn State is doing with their coaching search, but I figured they probably will hire somebody in the next few hours, so probably not worth doing a whole segment on that. Do want to switch gears, though. I do want to talk the latest twist with Lane Kiffin. Okay, so Lane Kiffin, listen, we've done the 7 stages of Lane Kiffin on this show. I very publicly have expressed how I feel about the behavior with which he acted on Thursday, Friday, Saturday of last week, right? We know the deal. We know what happened. We know that Lane, clearly wanted to coach in the college football playoff. We know that he was not allowed to coach in the college football playoff, and we know that he threw a big old fit like a child, okay? Tried to kick the can down the road, tried to convince, well, what if we're in the SEC championship game? Well, we're not in the SEC championship game. Well, we should be able to play. Well, we're not going to be able to play. Well, whatever. And by Sunday morning, it was nuclear and it was toxic. And we know what happened. Basically said, if you don't let me coach, basically, again, a kid throwing a temper tantrum. If you don't let me coach this game, I'm taking my whole offensive staff with me. I'm taking my players with me. You're going to have nothing left over for this playoff. Okay. It was a temper tantrum, and it was kind of honestly embarrassing for him. And 2 things can be true. Great head coach, but also a very embarrassing moment for him. Okay. Now, I do want to give him a half a second of credit, because on Tuesday, we did find out, Lane Kiffin released a statement that his offensive staff, most notably offensive coordinator Charlie Weiss Jr., who was on the plane with him from Oxford to Baton Rouge, will be going back to coach Ole Miss in the college football playoff. Okay, so Charlie Weiss Jr., assuming he doesn't get a head coaching job, will be the OC at LSU, but is going to be allowed to go back and coach Ole Miss during the college football playoff. And Lane Kiffin, to his credit, again, basically did say, like, look, I don't want to do anything that's going to hurt the ranking. It was before the ranking came out. And so I thought it was a nice move by him, whatever. With that said, though, what I can tell you is this. Tensions are still high in Oxford. And something that I mentioned this in passing on one of the shows last week, and I got a lot of pushback on it. I said, listen, I have been told by sources that I trust, and I'm not a big newsbreaker, sources say this. I'm telling you, I know people in a lot of places, okay? I'm like Garth Brooks. I got friends in low places, all right? And I know some people at Ole Miss, and they basically told me, before the Egg Bowl, win, lose, whatever, there are a lot of people, not just administrators, not even just fans, but players who are unhappy with Lane Kiffin. And so I got a lot of pushback. I'm assuming it was mostly from LSU fans. You don't know what you're talking about. The players love him. They're all going to follow him to Ole Miss, whatever, blah, 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 this and that. Well, apparently not, okay? So on Tuesday night, it was right after the playoff rankings were released, and I don't think it was a coincidence. I think Ole Miss's players were making sure before they started going nuclear on Lane Kiffin, the way he went nuclear on Ole Miss, that they were safely in the playoff. You didn't want to put any tension out there, and then all of a sudden you're the 13 seed in the college football playoff, okay? So I bring it up because I'm on social media. The rankings are out. And I see this tweet that goes crazy viral. Now, Matt, maybe we should put up Lane Kiffin's original statement just for some context. Okay, I'm not going to read the whole thing. but there was an important segment that a few of the players very clearly did not take kindly to. Lane Kiffin said, quote, "After a lot of prayer and time spent with my family, I made the difficult decision to accept the head coaching position at LSU. I was hoping to complete a historic 6-season run with this year's team by leading Ole Miss through the playoffs, capitalizing on the team's incredible success and their commitment to finish strong and investing everything into a playoff run with guardrails in place to protect the program in any areas of concern. My request to do so was denied by AD Keith Carter, despite the team also asking him to allow me to keep coaching them so they could better maintain their high level of performance. Unfortunately, that means Friday's Egg Bowl was my last game coaching the Rebels." There's more to it, but that part that I just read is important. My request to do so was denied by AD Keith Carter, despite the team also asking him to allow me to coach them through the playoff. Well, that was Lane Kiffin's version of the events. Some players, after the playoff rankings were announced, shared a much different version. Okay, Matt, you could pop up the first tweet. This was from Bryson Sanders, an offensive lineman. Quote, "Despite the team asking me to keep coaching," Bryson Sanders, an offensive lineman at Ole Miss, says, "I think everybody that was in that room would disagree." So Bryson Sanders, offensive lineman, basically says, "Coach, I love you. Thanks for the 11 wins. You're a big, filthy liar," okay? I don't think, he says, like, whatever you think happened in that room, nobody in that room was advocating for you to coach us in the playoff. I thought this one that came out a few minutes later was even more interesting. So Suntarine Perkins is really like the backbone of the defense. He's a Mississippi kid, really one of the few really highly ranked high school recruits that Lane landed, and it's clear that he is loyal to his state school. He tweeted out with quoting Lane Kiffin's statement, quote, and again, referencing Lane Kiffin saying that the players wanted him to coach in the playoff. Suntarine Perkins said, quote, "That was not the message you said in the meeting room. Everyone that was in there can vouch on that." Well, buddy, two players, two very important players, maybe your most important defensive player, coming out on social media and very clearly disputing your version of the facts. By the way, this was something we didn't even talk about last week. I did think it was interesting. I forget the exact day of it, but I remember Trinidad Chambliss at some point, the star quarterback, basically tweeted out a picture of him and Kiffin or him and whatever. Basically, it was clear that Lane Kiffin was trying to get guys in the building to show him support and to basically put on a public front that, hey, everything's great. These guys love me and they want me here. And I think it's interesting that Bryson Anderson and also Suntarine Perkins basically told a completely different version of the events, okay? And what I'll tell you is I'm not surprised because, like I told you, this stuff was happening even before the Egg Bowl. As a matter of fact, I'll just be honest. Like, I was in Vegas last week, may have placed a pretty penny on Mississippi State to cover and win outright in that Egg Bowl. Credit to Ole Miss for taking care of business. But I was told for days that it was toxic in that locker room, that not everybody was on board, that this message that Lane Kiffin kept trying to deliver to the public of, we're all in this together and my players support me whatever I do. And remember the statement that he had early last week? He said, guys, it's a new world. These players can leave whenever they want. They understand that it's the same for coaches. I'm like, no, they don't. Listen, if 2,000 players enter the portal, that means that there's probably 10 times that are not entering the portal. Like, not everybody is just trying to go to the next place and the next spot and the next this and the next that. The truth of the matter is it's actually the exact opposite. Most guys commit to a school, stay at a school, love the school. Now, maybe they'll transfer as a fifth-year guy or their last year if they're not going to play, but guys love the school. And this notion that, oh, the players do this all the time, so it's fine for us, it never jived with me. And again, it didn't also vibe with what I was told behind the scenes. And so, listen, Lane Kiffin is allowed to do whatever he wants. And I've said it. I think Lane Kiffin's going to be good at LSU. But this notion that, like, oh, it's all kumbaya and we all love each other, it was always a load of crap, okay? And not only was it a load of crap, let me also say this. It just defies, and this is where I think the players got frustrated, it defies the messaging that the coaching staff gives you all year long. We've talked about it a million times. I'm not going to pull up the sound again, but we had John Summerall on the pod during the season at Tulane. And I specifically asked him, I didn't name specific schools, but I said, look, you're from a certain area, Alabama, Auburn. You played at a certain place, Kentucky, obviously. I said, your name is being linked to all these jobs. How do you handle it? And he told the story. He said, the last week of fall camp, I had a meeting with the team. And I said, guys, there's going to be a lot of outside noise. And there's going to be a lot of outside noise for both parties. It all ends today, okay? If I'm successful, people are going to link me to other jobs. If I fail, people are going to say that I need to be fired and you need to bring in a new coach to replace me, okay? And he said, so I'm blocking all that out, and I need you all to block that out as well. No calls from your agents, no more NIL money, no more this, no renegotiating in October. It's full speed ahead once this season starts. And that image with John Summerall has stuck with me for this entire process. Because I don't know if Lane Kiffin said those exact words, but he said some version of that to his team. Hey, block out all the noise. Hey, no distractions. And then he ends up being the number one distraction in all of college football. And it's so frustrating to me to see people, and smart people. I mentioned Orlovsky a few minutes ago. Orlovsky was in locker rooms. Don't tell me it's a calendar issue. Don't tell me the coach isn't being a distraction. The coach is, of course, being a distraction. And so I don't blame the players, and I do think it shows this notion that it was some kumbaya, everybody's all in the same line, and we're all going to make our own decisions at the end of the year. Yes, players are going to transfer. Yes, coaches are going to leave. But it didn't have to be like this, and it didn't, I'm going to use a double negative here. It didn't not leave a sour taste in everybody's mouth. It left a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths. Not just fans, not just Keith Carter, but yes, the players themselves. So we'll see what happens. Ole Miss, and one thing I will say, I'm happy to see that they're comfortably in the bracket, that the committee didn't get cute, that the committee didn't try to explain, well, they don't have this and the coach isn't there. And I will credit Lane Kiffin. He could have been right the entire time and let Charlie Weiss coach the team the entire time. He did right by the school finally, days later by allowing the offensive staff to return. But this notion that all the players loved him and everything was good was never really true. All right, so what we're going to do, we're going to take one more break, come back. If there's any great questions, we'll get to them. Then I do want to get to some hoops. Them UConn Huskies going to Fog Allen Fieldhouse and getting a win. Carolina goes to Rupp and gets the win. Good news for Carolina. Not so good for Mark Pope and staff. Quick break, come back, wrap the show. All right, we're going to get back to the show in a minute. But before we do, you know what we got to do. We got to thank our friends. We got to thank our partners. We got to go ahead and thank Callie Puffs and CalliePuffs.com. Yeah, you see the logo on the back of the screen right here. Okay, so I've told you all about Callie Puffs, but family-owned company, not far from where I live. Joey, a huge sports fan. And one day he was sitting on the couch and he said, you know what? I need a snack that is both healthy but delicious, something my kids are going to love, something my family's going to love, something I'm going to love. And so he came up with Callie Puffs. This is the new age health food snack. You don't need to go to the grocery aisle and buy all that crap, the Doritos, the Fritos. No, my friends, you need Callie Puffs. Baked, not fried, avocado oil, no grease, healthy ingredients. But here's the best part. They taste freaking delicious. Actually, there's another best part. In addition to tasting delicious, in addition to being healthy, they are also taking care of listeners of the Aaron Torres pod. Okay, so check this out. All you got to do is go to CalliePuffs.com. That's CAULIPUFFS.com, CalliePuffs.com, and you can get 15% off any purchase with the promo code Torres. That's Torres, Torres. It's that simple. 15% off any purchase. One bag to try them out, 100 bags to cater a party. Doesn't really matter. Promo code Torres. CalliePuffs.com gets you 15% off. Callie Puffs also available on Amazon. You obviously can't get the promo code there, but CalliePuffs.com, CalliePuffs.com, promo code Torres gets you 15% off any purchase. Thank you to our friends at Callie Puffs. All right, everybody. I'm back. Good to be back. Good to be back. Final segment of the show, people. So good to be back. All right, so I promised on Tuesday's show, so yesterday's show, We're going to talk some college hoops today. And boy, oh boy, the Tuesday night slate was awesome. I hate to say it like this. It's really one of the last really big out of conference days before we get to conference play. Now we'll have a couple big Saturdays, but I guess Tuesday, Wednesdays, not going to get many nights better than what we had on Tuesday night. A lot to react to. And I do want to start with what happened at Fog Allen Fieldhouse Tuesday night. Okay, so UConn goes to Kansas. By the way, quick side story, but 2 years ago, UConn plays at Kansas. That was their 2024 championship team. I sat there and said, man, like, I actually went to that game. And part of it was, I was like, I don't know if I'm ever going to see my team play at Fog Allen Fieldhouse again. Well, they lost that game. 2 years later, they're back. And they go to Fog Allen, and listen, it was a weird game. UConn was without its leading scorer and rebounder, Torres Reed. Kansas was without its best player, Darren Peterson, who's basically been out the whole year at this point. Back and forth game. But man, oh man, got to give credit where it's due, because the UConn Huskies, listen, Dan Hurley said it after the game. He said he believes Fog Allen is the toughest place in college basketball to play. I have never been to Cameron, but I have been to Storrs, Tucson, Bloomington, Rupp, Bud Walton. I would say that Fog Allen is no doubt the toughest place to play. UConn, without its starting center, walks in and gets the 61-56 win. And for any UConn fan that wasn't officially sold that this team has flipped the script from last year was kind of a dud. There is no doubt that this team is legit. They're fierce. And that, oh, by the way, they're coming for natty number 7, baby. All right, so let's go ahead and hop into this one. Let's go ahead and talk about it. And, it was a weird game, right? So UConn's had a great out-of-conference portion of the slate, but it's been a little frustrating too. Can't seemingly continue to stay healthy. For whatever reason, they just cannot stay healthy with this team. Early on, Torres Reed and Braylon Mullins were out. Then Torres Reed comes back. Then he's out again. Then Braylon Mullins comes back. They both played on Black Friday against Illinois. Find out minutes before the game that Torres Reed isn't going to play. And even though, again, I know Darren Peterson wasn't available, early on to me, it did just feel like one of those games where it was just like, maybe it's just not UConn's night. UConn, when they're clicking, they're first to every loose ball. They're playing hard. They're banging bodies. They're doing whatever. And it just felt like early on, I thought Kansas kind of dictated the tempo and dictated the flow and dictated the game kind of in its entirety and in its totality, okay? Well, I bring it up because second half was a completely different deal. UConn's defense steps up. A couple very specific players step up, and they run. Can't say they ran Kansas out of the building, but they kind of completely controlled the second half, okay? Because UConn trailed by 5 in the first half, or at halftime, excuse me. After that, they fell down by as many as 6 with about 12, 13 minutes to go. And then they just totally clamped down on defense, okay? I think Kansas went like 13 minutes with 2 field goals or something like that. But to me, it was everybody that stepped up for UConn on a night where, like, that's the crazy part. UConn did not play anything close to its best on Tuesday night in Lawrence, okay? No Torres Reed. Silas Demery, who's the new point guard. If you remember, kind of in that Dan Hurley system, the point guard spot is just so important. He actually had a triple-double, Silas Demery, a few weeks ago. He finishes this game with 2 points, 4 assists, and 3 turnovers. Okay, so he certainly did not play his best game, but other guys stepped up. I think the story of the game, Braylon Mullins. Okay, if you're a high school, or if you're a basketball fan, you know the name Braylon Mullins. McDonald's All-American, kind of came down to a Final 5. Michigan was in there. Kentucky was in there. Carolina was in there. Indiana was in there as well. He ends up picking UConn, and it's crazy because there's been so much excitement about him. He's been out with an ankle injury since the preseason. Played on Black Friday against Illinois. Really, had a good game, whatever, but it wasn't like jumped off the page. Well, this kid in his second career game, first career road game, off the bench, 17 points off the bench. Looked calm, looked poised, looked comfortable, made a couple really big shots late. You got to give him credit. The other guy that I'm going to give credit to? The stat sheet doesn't fully show the impact, but Alex Karaban, okay? We've talked about Alex Karaban, but last year, he comes back off those 2 national championships. He was a starter on both of the 23 and 24 title teams. And he comes back, and it's kind of this weird thing of like, he's kind of in a role that he's not used to, and there's all sorts of injuries, and Liam McNeely is in another lineup, misses a couple big free throws against Villanova. They end up losing the game. And it just was one of those years where like everything that could go wrong did. Well, he has been excellent this year, and he was excellent on Tuesday night at Fog Allen Fieldhouse. Finishes with 11 points in this game, but it felt like all of them were virtually in the second half, and all of them were in big moments, second chance points, loose balls, deep shots, whatever. I was so impressed by him, and I'm personally actually very happy for him. So credit to UConn for getting the win. Should mention, by the way, Eric Ryba, the true freshman, he has been the guy that has been tasked with having to fill the shoes for Torres Reed. And it's kind of interesting. Like, I hadn't even thought of it until this moment. I think you can legitimately argue this may actually be the best thing for UConn is dealing with these injuries. Now, you never want to deal with injuries, but, you go back a few years ago, and I've said it a million times, but Donovan Clingan, middle of the season, about, late November, early December, he hurts. He has an injury. I think it was an ankle or a foot or something. And he didn't really come back until, middle of January, late January, early February. And he kind of ramped up and got better as the season went on. And then when he was playing his best, it was right around Big East tournament, NCAA tournament. And it's like, oh, UConn's unstoppable. Well, this isn't an apples to apples thing, but with Torres Reed being out, Eric Ryba has had to step up as a big guy. And like, you look at this kid, man, like was actually, and we said this after the Arizona game, I would argue he was actually probably the only player that I would say played really well against Arizona. That is UConn's only loss to this point in the season. But in that game had 15 points, 4 rebounds. Again, on the road, Fog Allen Fieldhouse. This is the only big man essentially that they have. Finishes with 12 points and 8 boards. Dwayne Karoma off the bench is giving them good minutes as guys get injured. And so, like, man, we just got to give credit where it's due. Listen, I don't like doing the thing where we immediately default to when some team has a big win. Oh, they're the best team. Like I did it with Arizona a few weeks ago after Arizona beat UConn. And if you looked at Arizona's resume at the time, they beat Florida, beat UCLA on a neutral, beat UConn in stores. And I remember saying at the time, I'm like, listen, I don't know what's going to happen in February. I don't know what's going to happen in March. That might be the best team in college basketball. And I said it about Arizona a few weeks ago. Michigan, what they did in Vegas at the Players era, destroyed Auburn, destroyed Gonzaga. I think they looked the part. But I'm just telling you, man, UConn has all the pieces. They were, hate to brag, they were my preseason national championship pick. But they have all the pieces. They have the size. They have the physicality. They have the shooting. They can beat you in so many different ways. I'll tell a quick side story. When I was in Vegas for Players era, I won't name the name or name the school, but I saw a coach who has already played UConn. All I'll say is this, is that he basically insinuated like that was as tough of a team as we've basically played in the last 2 or 3 years. Now, they didn't play UConn 2 or 3 years ago, but basically his insinuation was like, this was when Torres Reed was healthy. Like, that dude is a load. They got shooters around him. They got a big point guard. Like we didn't have any answers for them. I'll tell you another quick side story. I remember 2023, that national championship with Adama Sanogo, Andre Jackson. And I know we're just doing UConn history at this point, but I remember seeing a coach at the Final Four that year and saying like, yeah, we went to scout you guys. And we were like, oh yeah, we have no answers for this team. And I'm not saying that's where UConn is, but what I am saying is when you can go on the road to Kansas, and again, I know they didn't have Darren Peterson. I'm not trying to say that they beat the best version of the best Kansas team that's ever walked into Fog Allen Fieldhouse. But when you can go into that arena and your point guard doesn't play well and Torres Reed is not available, that's as good of a win as you're going to have all year. And I'll also add, like, I know it's early to start talking about, the net rankings came out this week, and I think it's really dumb to start talking about the net in November, okay, or December, I guess it technically is. But you look at UConn, and a couple things stand out. The Big East is not very good early in the year. And why that's important to me is for 2 reasons. Is because, one, they're going to be able, if they just play like this, they're going to be able to pile up wins. DePaul's whatever, St. John's is struggling right now, Providence is a mess, Marquette is a mess, you go on and on down the list. But the converse to this is you kind of need these wins in the out of conference, because if you don't get them, there might not be great opportunities once league play starts. So to go to Fog Allen, get the win, like I'm saying, is I don't think we saw anything close to the best version of UConn in that game. Your starting center's out. Your starting point guard does not play well. But on the opposite side, Braylon Mullins out of nowhere with just a phenomenal game and a phenomenal effort. UConn gets the win. And again, I don't want to start, every time a team picks up a big win, I don't want to say, oh, that's the best team in the country. No, it's Michigan. No, it's Arizona. No, it's BYU. No, it's whoever. All I'll say is UConn has all the pieces. And, if they can ever get healthy at the same time, look out, because they are a load. 7-1. By the way, next week they play Florida at Madison Square Garden in the Jimmy V. They also play Texas. So they have a chance to really put together a nice resume heading into Big East play, which obviously starts a few weeks from now. Kansas, by the way, no big takeaways from Kansas. I've said it. I really like that roster. They need to get Darren Peterson back. I know every game that Darren Peterson doesn't play, Kansas fans convince themselves that there's some weird opt-out coming and he's not playing. Maybe it happens. It feels weird to me. I don't think he's the definitive number one pick in the draft if he doesn't play. And on top of it, why would he be with the team? If he's shutting it down to go train somewhere, doesn't smell test, doesn't pass. So they got to get him right. But remember, they won 3 games last week at the Players era. They beat Tennessee without Darren Peterson. You got to get him back for Big 12 play at this point. I think Kansas's resume is pretty solid, all things considered. 3 wins at the Players era, 3 wins against power. Do still have some tough games left on the schedule, by the way. Missouri in the border war. And then on top of that, they also have at NC State. NC State, by the way, plays tonight against producer Matt's Auburn Tigers. All right, let's switch gears. ACC SEC Challenge. And boy, oh boy, oh boy, is there a game that we absolutely, positively have to talk about. This game is the University of North Carolina versus the Kentucky Wildcats. Game was in Rupp Arena. Kentucky desperately needs a win. Kentucky, by the way, was an 8.5-point favorite in the Circa Sportsbook. North Carolina ends up getting the win 67-64. Great win for Carolina. We'll discuss in half a second. But goodness gracious, Kentucky sitting at 5-3 right now. 0-3 against power conference competition. Listen, we got a lot of takes on Mark Pope, on Kentucky. It ain't pretty, and I don't know if it's getting any better anytime soon. So let's go ahead and discuss. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about it. First of all, I would be remiss if I did not at least spend half a second talking about Hubert Davis in North Carolina. Okay, if I'm going to criticize Hubert Davis all of last season, if I'm going to criticize him for a large chunk of the offseason, I got to give him credit because I do think he's put together a very nice roster. Now, I don't think the roster played anywhere close to its best on Tuesday night, but you come out with the win. And I think, look, they looked the part. They looked the part of a top 15, top 20 team. It's funny, in the preseason, we talked a lot about, what does North Carolina have to do for Hubert Davis to have his job beyond this year? And what I said was multiple things. Is one, you have to, everyone wants to put on, do they have to make the Sweet 16? Do they have to make the tournament? And I said, I think there's 2 things. I think you have to not only make the tournament, but win a few games. But I think you also have to have the kind of year that makes people makes people think that you're the guy going forward, right? And what do I mean by that? Is anyone can win games once you get in the tournament. We've had 11 seeds make the Final Four. We've had 15 seeds make the Sweet 16. I'm not saying Carolina would be a 15 seed, but you get the point. So it's not just about making the tournament. It's how do you look all season, right? It's with North Carolina, it was, I think you got to be a consistent top 20 team, win some games that matter, and give people belief this is a really good team. And then whatever happens in the tournament, it's a crapshoot. Could have a sprained ankle, could have a bad foul call, whatever. But are you one of those teams all year long? And to North Carolina's credit, they looked the part. They already beat Kansas. Only loss was to Michigan State. Michigan State, listen, Michigan State might be the best team in the country, which is crazy, but they might be. Already beat Arkansas, already beat Kentucky, already beat Carolina, beat Iowa to open Big Ten play last year. By the way, I'm going to have to sneeze here. Excuse me. Okay, I think we're good. I survived. So let's credit North Carolina. These are the kind of wins that you have to get no matter how ugly they are. But speaking of, and by the way, Jay Williams said it. He said they look the part. He said, this is the kind of Carolina team that I used to play all the time when I was in college basketball. Big, athletic, NBA bodies, Caleb Wilson, Henry Visar, Jaron Stevenson. The Derek Dixon kid made some plays late. But look, we also have to be honest. We also have to be transparent. We also have to call a spade a spade. Kentucky is not very good right now, man. And it's crazy to me. And listen, before I even get into Kentucky, like, I'll own it. I thought they were going to be really good this year. I had them preseason number 3. I had them in the Final Four, and I was wrong. Now, I'll also say, I think part of it is I do think not having Jalen Lowe, your projected starting point guard, does matter, okay? And there's reasons and there's excuses in life anytime things go wrong. And I don't think this is an excuse. I think it's when your entire system is up-tempo and built on having a specific point guard and that specific point guard is not available, it makes it tough to win games. And he's kind of the piece that brings everything else together. And when you don't have him, it looks bad. Now, you can criticize Mark Pope for not having a backup. You can criticize Mark Pope for some other things, which we're going to get into in a second. And you could certainly say Tuesday night at Rupp Arena, they were without 3 starters, okay? But at the same time, a couple things. One, the Jaden Quain stuff, it's weird. If you know you're not going to have him until January, and you know what the schedule is looking like, you got to make alternative plans. Like, I don't want to hear, well, Jaden Quains isn't available. Well, you knew he wasn't going to be available until January. So I bring it up because it doesn't speak to the fact that Brandon Garrison has not developed at all. Doesn't speak to the fact that I don't think Malachi Moreno played very well. But I don't believe that is an excuse. What I will say is, I had somebody text me this. I don't know what Kentucky's identity is right now, okay? I don't know what Kentucky's identity is. And I'll say this too. They just misevaluated on a lot of players, okay? And it's not all that. I don't want to say it's not all their fault. They're the professionals. I thought Denzel Aberdeen could be a serviceable backup point guard if Jalen Lowe got banged up, got in foul trouble, whatever. He has not been that. The offense looks like a total mess with him running the show. Not totally his fault, but it is sort of his fault. Beyond that, I mentioned Malachi Moreno against a bigger team did not play well. I thought he's been playing well. Colin Chandler did what he could. He missed the game-tying layup at the end. But I think a lot of people brought up a very important point. If Colin Chandler is taking your big shots, that is a bad sign because that is not a guy that is supposed to be taking big shots late in the game at this point in the season. And so I could go on and on, but just what stands out to me just watching this team, one, they're just not a fun watch, right? You can lose games and you can still come out of it and be like positives. Like, look at, Kansas. I think there's positives. Get Darren Peterson back. Boom, you're good to go. And you have a couple nice wins even without Darren Peterson. Florida, you can tangibly see improvement even if they didn't beat Duke. But with Kentucky, like, one, I don't know what they do well. They're not a fun watch. Like, there's not a player. Like there are bad teams that have good players that I enjoy watching. I don't enjoy watching this Kentucky team. I think there's a lot of misevaluations. The other thing, I'll give Kevin Sweeney from Sports Illustrated credit. He and I have certainly disagreed on some stuff in the past, but I think he and I are in a good place. I saw him in Vegas last week. He's a good guy, and he loves college basketball. I thought he brought up the best point on Kentucky is that, Pope's entire system is built on spacing and three-point shooting. You certainly can't blame Pope for the injury to the point guard. But what you can do is blame Pope for just not having enough three-point shooting in this system, period. And I know what he said in the offseason, and by the way, I think it was a little bit of a con, if we're being perfectly honest, is he said, well, look, statistically, these guys weren't great three-point shooters, but they haven't been in our system. Wait till they get in our system with better players, and let's see what happens from there. Well, we've seen them in the system, and as you can see on the screen, thanks to producer Matt, Kentucky was 1 for 13 from behind the three-point arc. So I just think it was a systematic miscalculation of everything. And yes, by the way, 8 straight three-pointers missed. And I haven't even mentioned the fact that they went, 10 minutes of game action without a field goal made, 13 straight missed field goals. I forgot to mention that because it was unwatchable. And so I'm all over the place, but I think this team is all over. But like I'm trying in real time to justify it. But I think it was misevaluation of a lot of guys. And I do think it was misevaluation of what makes Mark Pope's system work. It's a steady point guard, which they clearly, because of injury, do not have, but it's also three-point shooting. And I sort of understand it because I remember talking about it at the time in the summer of basically him saying, like, year one in the SEC, I brought in a bunch of shooters, and there were games where we just weren't athletic enough. You know, you go back to last year, they lose 3 times to Bama. Bama kind of blows them off the court in the SEC tournament. You're like, athletically, they're not even in the same stratosphere as Alabama. But they had the skill and the system looked good, and you had the three-point shooting. And so I think this is a fundamentally flawed team. You know, I'm not ready to give up on them. First of all, they do still have a couple big chances before out of conference play. They play Gonzaga this Friday. Not feeling great about that one, but Indiana at home, you know, Indiana is basically untested at this point. You also have St. John's in Atlanta. Ask Rick Pitino. I was in the building with Rick Pitino at the Players Era last week. Rick Pitino, he knows that team has a lot of work as well. So there are still wins to be had. And I think the other thing that's obvious is the SEC is not very good right now. But if I was trying to diagnose this team, misevaluation of talent, lack of development, I think, with guys like Brandon Garrison. Otega Owe was better on Tuesday night. You need to get him playing like an All-American. He was so dynamic last year, and on Tuesday, or all season long, if he's not getting a fast break dunk, he's basically giving you nothing offensively. And so misevaluation on the new guys. The returnees did not get better except for Colin Chandler. And then just not enough three-point shooting. And again, I want to give Kevin Sweeney credit for that because I thought that was a very salient point of, like, the entire system is built on three-point shooting and you have none right now. So Kentucky loses. They play at Gonzaga. I'm not ready to punt on the season yet just because there's going to be wins to be had in the SEC. And you probably could have, maybe should have beaten North Carolina. You win that game. We all feel a little bit different about this team, but you didn't. And now you're 5-3 with 0 signature wins. Really quickly, we're an hour and a half in. Florida loses at Duke. I thought Florida showed some signs. They also, let me pull up the stats here. I want to see something really quick on Florida. Florida. Hold on one second. We're going to get out of here on this because I got to run here. But Florida loses 67-66. I give them credit for fighting. This is the big concern to me with Florida. 4 assists on 25 made field goals, okay? Tommy Hawk is the real deal. Tommy Hawk is the real deal. I always call him Hawk, but it's Hawk. He's the real deal. The bigs played better. Probably the best game that Alex Condon has played given the stakes all season long. Boogie Fland looks improved. Listen, Xavier Lee, I'm not going to pick on him, but we said it in the summer. I just thought there was a total miscalculation by the media. I'm not going to blame Todd Golden. He's trying to put a team together. They lost 3 NBA guards. The notion that a dude from the Ivy League, and the other thing too with Xavier Lee is there was this notion of, well, against high majors, he was awesome last year. I think they played 1 high major and he was fine. And I watched the film and I'm like, he's 6'2", 6'3". I what am I missing? I don't see it. I don't see it at all. And so anyway, they lose this game. I just think the guards aren't good enough. If I'm looking for a silver lining, one, the bigs are starting to play better. I'll say this too, the Urban Klavchar kid off the bench I think is pretty good, had some big shots in this game, and really overall has had some really good games this season. I do think Florida's a pretty flawed team though. Yeah, I don't know what else there is to say on Florida. I don't think this is because they were close at Cameron that they're ready to turn the corner. By the way, Tennessee losing at Syracuse, Texas A&M, Buckyball losing or surviving against Pitt. So a lot of interesting results from Tuesday. All right, I'll tell you what, I got to go ahead and get out of here. Thank you all for listening. Matt, we can do I have a minute for a couple questions. Do we have anything interesting in the chat before we go? Could be football, basketball, whatever. Okay. Yeah, see, Aunt G brings up the most important point on Jalen Lowe. Is everyone's like, well, Jalen Lowe, and I know I just did it a minute ago, but Jalen Lowe did play against Louisville, and Louisville still went off on him. So, by the way, when I'm in Mid Kentucky Downs next week, I think I'm going to try to swing by Louisville, maybe catch a practice. Maybe it might be Mikael Brown season for Torres next week. So we'll see what happens there. But yeah, Jalen Lowe did play against Louisville, and Louisville still went belt to ass on Kentucky. So Aunt G brings up a good point. Kentucky's just not very good right now. And again, I said it. I stumbled through that segment because I just am like at a loss for words how bad they are. By the way, I didn't even mention it, and it's probably for the best. I did tweet this out, and some people got mad at me. Some people didn't. Like John Calipari, I get it. It was time to go, and I'm not going to do some revisionist history and say that it wasn't time to go. But at least even his bad teams were pretty interesting to watch. Now, the COVID team, no. But 2023, they were a 6 seed. And they weren't, just kind of a forgettable season. They lost in the second round to Kansas State. On that team, they had Cason Wallace, a lottery pick, and Oscar Tshiebwe, the national player of the year before. So I'm not going to do the revisionist history. Cal should have stayed. No. It's best for everybody that Cal moved on. But at least his even his great teams weren't interesting, were at least a little interesting. This team, there's just not much there. Maybe Kentucky's just a football school now with Will Stein. Maybe they're just a football school now with Will Stein. Matt, one or two more, and we'll go ahead and get out of here. Yeah, it looked like an NIT game. Peanut Butter Posse says it looked like an NIT game. It was bad, man. It was tough. And like I said, that's my issue is there's just not much redeem. Like I was just saying it. Like it's one thing if you lose a game because the other team's really good. Like, again, I'm not even that high on Florida, but you can certainly take positives out of the Florida game. UConn beats Kansas. I think Kansas can take some positives out of the UConn game, even though they lost at home, assuming that Darren Peterson is coming back. Like, what's the positive out of the Kentucky game? Otega Owe was a little bit better. I don't know. All right, I'll tell you what. I think we're going to go ahead and get out of here. It's a little bit of a downer to end the show, but if you're not subscribed to Aaron Torres Pod, make sure to do so. Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music, wherever you get your podcast, make sure to subscribe. Make sure to rate and review the show. Go ahead, give me a quick 5 stars. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, all that good stuff. Make sure you're following on social media at Aaron_Torres on Twitter, at Aaron Torres Pod on Instagram, Aaron Torres podcast questions at gmail.com, Aaron Torres podcast questions at gmail.com. SeatGeek, promo code Torres. Maybe you're a Kentucky fan. You need to buy tickets to something other than Kentucky basketball when they play. You're going to need that promo code Torres. Gets you $20 off your first purchase. SeatGeek.com, promo code Torres gets you $20 off your first purchase. Thank you to Circa Casino, new sports book, Mint Kentucky Downs. I will be down there next week for a very brief stop-in. And then finally, Collie Puffs, use promo code Torres for 15% off. Guys, girls, thank you all for joining the show today. Awesome live show. By the way, big game tonight, Louisville at Arkansas. Big A says, not feeling good about my Hogs tonight. Big one for Arkansas. It's one you can't lose at home. I haven't seen a point spread yet on that. Let me see if I can find it really quick. Arkansas does need a win here. With Arkansas, I have my own takes on Arkansas. We'll save them for tomorrow. But you were right. Like if Cam Boozer doesn't go bananas, by the way, there's Cam Boozer, I don't know how he is as an NBA draft prospect. He might be the best player in college basketball. And I know Arkansas fans will tell you that he got away with a million hooks and holds, and I get it. And I'm not going to fight you on that. But that Thanksgiving night game, Cam Boozer goes off for 35 points in that game. And then, oh, by the way, has another 29-6 against Florida. And Florida has a great front line. So it just shows you how much talent is in this freshman class. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. By the way, let's see. Circa currently has, let's see here. Do they have a line out? Louisville, 4-point road favorite at Bud Walton Arena. Okay. Louisville just might be really good too, but Arkansas does need this win. All right, I'm going to roll. Thank you for your support. Apple, Spotify. Make sure you subscribe, rate, review. I will be back Thursday morning. We'll talk Arkansas, Louisville. Anything else? Maybe Penn State will have a football coach by then. Who knows?